Yes, everyone. Tough one. It's kind of one of those weird ones. We have to analyze a defeat. We've been so used to analyzing wins and sort of basking in our glory, basking at being top of the league. And the question that I'm seeing everywhere right now, specifically, Dave, is, with the way that sort of Spurs went about their play the moment that we went down to 9 men, we're not going to really focus on the red cards, how they happened, whether they should have been or not. We're going to be really kind of just focusing kind of more on a tactical question here of, maybe were Spurs setting up in kind of a brave way, but was it kind of naive at the same time? Or was it actually, the right way to go about things? And I'm kind of referring to that very high line that we played with 10 men, with 9 men, and even at times when, it was starting to reach towards the end of the game, maybe we could have sat back a little. We didn't do so. We kept playing the same way, stuck with the same sort of philosophy. And Ange himself said we would play that way even if we went down to 5 men. So, Dave, the question that's on everyone's minds is, was that a bit naive by Postecoglou to sort of have the team play that way, went down to those sort of kind of situations?
Look, first of all, I want to address the talking point around it, and then I'll get into whether it's naive or genius. Spurs fans have to take themselves back to 6 months ago when we had Antonio Conte. Pundits alike, fans alike were saying we don't want a manager that focuses on the opposition first and what we can do second. We want a manager that focuses on what we can do to go and affect games and win games and focus on the opposition second. So we've got that. So I don't think we should be moaning or crying about it, being brutally honest, because that's what we asked for in this new appointment with the new manager. Someone that focuses on what we're doing regardless of the situation. So we've got that, and I'm okay with it. Even pundits were saying, Tottenham were too defensive. Tottenham need a manager that worries, about what they do with some of the great attacking players at our disposal. So for me, I find it very hard to listen to people who are saying it's maybe naive, because this is what a lot of Spurs fans wanted and asked for when we had someone like Antonio Conte in charge. So I don't believe he should change his approach to the game. And me personally, Jack, I think it's actually genius, and there's a number of reasons why. I get it's unorthodox, right? It's not the norm, but it, under Antonio Conte, we sat that deep that we found it very hard to get out, and the ball was getting turned over a lot in our half, which meant it was just a siege mentality on our goal. Shots flying in left, right, and centre, crosses coming in left, right, and centre. And then when we turned the ball over, we found it very hard then to play through that and get up the field. Whereas playing that high line, what it actually done is, rather than sit back and be resigned to fate, which we would have lost anyway, we tried to go and affect the game. We tried to get something out of that game, and that high line meant that when we did turn over the ball, we were automatically in Chelsea's half, and we could go and make something happen. We could go and create chances. On the counter, it also sort of threw Chelsea off for a large period of that game. They couldn't find that right ball for quite some time to thread in behind, and it only really came back to bite us in the last few minutes after we had three massive opportunities, one ruled offside, one that Bentancur should have put in the back of the net, and one that Sonny had an opportunity. The game only really got away from us after that, and that's when our legs were gone. So for me, I think it's absolute genius in what we wanted when we appointed this guy.
It's a complicated answer for me when it comes to it because I kind of do come from sort of a bit of a school of thought, being a very bad footballer myself, that, sometimes when you're coming up against stronger opponents or even you find yourself in a really bad situation in a game, there is sometimes that tendency just to drop back, consolidate, sort of organize yourselves where you don't have to nearly always work as hard sort of defensively, where you're not covering as much ground. You sort of just take a certain shape that can just frustrate even the better teams, the teams that are stronger than you, better than you, and you can sort of find a way to sort of stay in a game as long as you would, try to, I guess. And I think there kind of comes to a point where maybe Spurs are sort of past that sort of, moment where we have good enough players that we shouldn't need to try to play that way. We shouldn't need to even try to think that way. It's just one of those things where during the watch long, I was sort of like finding myself, still sort of learning that, learning to think, like Ange does, learning to see, this sort of lens, this sort of kind of new philosophy. Because coming from sort of kind of the old days of Jose and Conte, I would have seen a lot of logic and, sort of sitting back and would have sitting deep and sort of in that organized shape. Even we saw how Liverpool did it, and it was very effective. I didn't think they had any plan on scoring another goal in that game. They just were sort of sitting there to just, let's see if we can see out the rest of this game. And they got very close in doing it. And that's where I sort of was like during the watch along thinking, what if we tried that? Maybe we can actually cause, Chelsea enough frustrations that we can sort of get out of there with a point. But now I realize that that's sort of the thing that Ange will never do. He's not going to just sort of concede all of a sudden all of his, sort of ways of thinking and attacking patterns just because he finds himself in a bad situation like that. He doesn't want to end up losing like how Liverpool did, where they did end up sitting back for the rest of the game, kind of forcing the Liverpool fans just to sort of kind of sit in fear, sit in horror, just watching wave after wave after wave of attack and their team not really offer much of anything going forward, right? Or even try to get back into the game. And eventually they were heartbroken, right? After they thought they were about to get away with it, they were eventually heartbroken. And it looks like Ange just didn't really want to go out that way. And also, even too, we have to give credit to some of our players still in possession, I think, with 9 men. We still created chances and we still made actually Chelsea look pretty bad actually at periods, still with 9 men, the way that we were still passing the ball about, kind of still making them, kind of worry and kind of sweat with some of the moments and just even some of the spells that we were having. There were even times where we were actually still passing it around their 18-yard area just with 9 men, trying to make something happen. And that just still shows that Spurs were actually capable of going for it, capable of still winning that game, capable of actually getting something out of it in maybe the less, or maybe in a unconventional way. The conventional way would be to sit back and see if you can nick it in some sort of way. But he actually didn't want to do that, Dave. And that just shows that, I guess that's how he feels. Like if it was his dad watching him or something like that, his dad wouldn't want him to, sit back and just sort of like, see out the rest of this game. He would say, you still go for it, see if you can win the game from here. And I guess I'm just sort of, getting used to that sort of thing. Because during the watch along, yeah, I was having panic attacks, with the way that we were trying to play.
Look, I get it, right? I do get maybe some of the skepticism maybe around it, but I actually think it's a refreshing approach. And if it comes off and Bentancur takes that opportunity, or Dyer's goal isn't ruled offside, or Son takes it, everyone's sitting here talking about how genius it is today. No one's talking about it being naive, this, that, and the other. And what I'd also add to what you were saying there, Jack, is that underneath Antonio Conte, right, a lot of fans were saying that why are we playing this way when it's clear our players can't play like that? They can't play under pressure with balls coming into the box. When you look at the way the game went last night, we had to put Eric Dyer in there. We had to put Højbjerg back there at centre back. Emerson came in at left back. So rather than persist on or do something that we know has not worked under previous managers, Postecoglou tried to do something a little bit different with it. And I'm okay with that. Even the likes of Pedro Porro and all, they've shown they couldn't play like that under Conte. And look, we know what would have happened inevitably. The pressure would have come, the mistake would have happened, and they would have scored a goal eventually. So the fact that we tried a different approach, and even though we were down to 10 men, even though we went down to 9 men, we still didn't abandon our philosophy and what we're about, which I absolutely love, by the way, because we actually pinned Chelsea back for the last 10 minutes of that game. We were the better team coming out of that. And the way we approached it, with us still pressing down to 9 men, still trying to attack and go and look for goals and creating some great opportunities. That's why a lot of fans came away from that last night going, huge respect to them players. We've got players that care for this badge, that play with their hearts for this badge, because the way we went and approached it, the players have brought into that. If Ange Postecoglou starts changing that, all of a sudden players will spot the weakness, and those who are maybe not on board with Ange will start taking the piss, and that's where fractures start. Ange Postecoglou has to stick to his philosophy, and I'm glad he did last night. It's one of them. We brought him in. We know it's high risk football. We've took a lot of rewards from it so far. Last night, it didn't pan out that way. But, I'm proud that we didn't sit back and do the norm and we tried to go and affect the game. We tried to go and salvage a point. We tried to go and win it. And there's a lot of admirable qualities from that.
He just seems like a guy that just doesn't want to lose that way, because your back's already against the wall. It's already a losing situation. The team should beat you, right? When you are down to 9 men, they should, right? And they would be embarrassed if they couldn't. So how do you want to end up going? How do you want to end up going down, right? How do you want to end up, going out? You want to go out, trying, your best to still keep throwing punches, to still keep, maybe giving them a scare, or do you want to kind of just sort of, like I said, consolidate, just sort of kind of maybe see if you can ride out the waves of attack and just sort of go for that. In a way, it's a bit more of a defeatist approach, kind of like, yeah, it's sort of over. Let's see if we can just sort of survive this as best we can. And Ange seems to be very much on the other end of things. And I think, the question is it naive? I would actually just say it's unconventional, because the conventional way to do it is sort of that old school of thought and that old way of thinking. And I actually think he's really made a real testament to it. And I'm actually quite proud of him. And I also am quite proud of, the majority of these players. I actually think we learned a lot about the players in this game, because they showed that sort of togetherness as well that I was quite impressed by, especially in the case of sort of a lot of the defenders, a lot of the midfielders. Even though we were just terrified, especially me, the way that we were playing, they sort of seemed to know that, yeah, this is how we're supposed to play. This is how we're supposed to line up. The way that they kept sort of congratulating each other with a lot of their defensive moments and contributions, there was a real togetherness. There was a real sort of energy about us. And even with 9 men, the ground that some of these players were covering, some of still, this unselfish runs that they were making for each other, in and out of possession, even with possession, right? There were so many moments where we still did have runners, going forward, trying to make something, out of nothing. And I think that's what's also just very impressed by all of this. It's just sort of actually the real sort of togetherness that we showed. And had we gotten actually that equalizer, late in the game, or had we even gotten a go-ahead goal at some stage, Ange seems like the guy that, while he is going to go for the more unconventional approach, we have seen him when he sees, the game starting to wind down, and when we do have a lead, he's thrown on defenders and he's thrown on extra midfielders, and he's consolidated, and he's, gone for a different shape at times when he sees out, a game. He doesn't do it, in like the 60th minute or the 70th minute by any means, but we've seen him throw on Emerson in the 85th minute. We've seen him throw on Højbjerg in the 80th minute just to see out a game and everything like that. So if we were down to 9 men and Bentancur scores that, Dyer scores that. You also had another chance as well for Sonny, of course, as well. I actually do think Ange would have made a change, right then and there. But he just wasn't going to, he wanted to see if we could actually get something. He wanted to see if we could actually win it, or at least still give Chelsea a decent fight until the very end. And had we gotten that goal at the very end, which we did have chances for, and we could have taken them, but I'm not mad that we didn't take him. I mean, it's all right. But if we had, I think he actually would have, probably made a change and probably would have actually tried to see if we could have gotten all 3 points or gotten a point out of it. So there's also that to think about as well. While you might think it was a bit unconventional, I don't think he's a total idiot or anything like that. I think he would have then made a change in that regard. Also, maybe just a quick shout out, Dave, as well, for I think Vicario might as well be just the definition of crack. I mean, sweeper, keeper, possession, I mean, saves. He's just the all-in-one. I mean, so it actually, if you are going to play that sort of way, you need a keeper that can also, keep you in it. And I think he showed that if you have that good of a keeper, might as well, maybe try to play that way, I guess, because he's absolutely unstoppable.
Look, Vicario was absolutely brilliant last night, by the way. And if you go back and look at a lot of the highlights, he spent a lot of time on the edge of his area, anticipating, waiting for them balls to come over the top. And a lot of them he actually dealt with up until near the end, where we just couldn't get back in time to maybe scope for that chance. But, if you go back and what we played last night is the old conventional offside trap. It's nothing new. It's nothing exciting. It's just an old offside trap that we used last night, where you play a high defensive line, everyone stays in one line, and your keeper tries to mop up things that come over the top if a player ends up beating that trap. That's what we played last night. And Jack, the way I see it is, right, do we sit in and get resigned to our own destiny? Or do we go out and try and create our own destiny? And that's what we done last night. And that's an admirable quality. And Postecoglou, when you play like that, it will show what players are here for you, what players are here for the club, and what players are not. And last night we seen a hell of a lot of them players are here for the club, fighting for the cause. And Postecoglou will now know who he can use depending when the chips are down. And he knows a lot of them guys he can trust, which for me, look, you learn more from a lose than what you do from a win, Jack, right? And we learned a lot last night. I just think there's a lot made about this high line because it's unconventional, but it's nothing new. All we done was play the offside trap.
That was a good point that you made there at the end, though, right? Where we actually still learned a lot about ourselves, and actually a lot of good things, I think, about ourselves, even with this loss and even in these losing moments and sort of scary moments. Whereas I've actually heard a lot of Chelsea pundits who are even former Chelsea players say we learned nothing about Chelsea after this game. They said we were absolutely being outplayed in the first 20 minutes, when Spurs were 11 versus 11. And then they said, and then we were sort of, the game just got turned around and spun on its head. But Chelsea didn't really make great work of it. Like, they still made it look hard. They still had scary moments defensively. They still let Spurs sort of stay in the game and still kind of play a brand of football that I think most Chelsea fans feel like that they should be kind of playing right now. And especially when we were playing with 9 men, we were still, playing it around them, still playing it through them. And I think that's where they were sort of thinking, like, did we even learn anything about Chelsea other than sort of being given, a pretty advantageous scenario where you're down to 9 men, and they just didn't really show, actually, I think, a whole lot in those moments. And I think, actually, whereas Spurs, like you said, actually showed definitely a bit more about themselves. Definitely. That's a good point. Unless you have anything else to say, Dave, I mean, I just sort of answer the question simply. I think I've originally, during the watch along, was a little frustrated with how we played.
Mm.
But the more I've thought about it, having a night's sleep on it, I think I just have to understand this is sort of the lens and the thinking and the mindset that I just have to slowly get adjusted to. And it's not naive. I actually think there was a lot of merit and a lot of bravery to it. And like I said, more than two chances, more than two clear cut chances that we created. And had we taken one of those, it would have been an entirely different game. And there's actually something to that, because if you're going to sit back for the rest of the game, you're not going to create those chances. You're simply not going to. And I think that's where I'm, starting to realize that there is a way to play, even in these sort of terrible scenarios.
No, there is, and Postecoglou has shown that, Jack. Look, like I said, I think it's genius. I think it's one where defensively we were able to sort of do all right up until 90 minutes. It kept us in a game, but also we didn't lose any real attacking impetus because we were still able to create chances. And when we did turn the ball over, we were already in their half rather than trying to work it into their half. So I think it worked out overall. I think what we should be talking about today is, I get a lot of the conversations are about the high line, but I think one thing I learned from that game is, yes, we've got a great squad. They're fighting for the badge, to show that energy and stuff, but it can very easily get unnerved. And I think a lot of teams will look to come and try and rile Tottenham players up now with some, maybe a bit of the disciplinary record that we've got going on. And I do think that's maybe the area we should be focusing on. That these players have to learn, that you can't react to certain situations. You just got to stay focused.
Maybe that's a good question for next time for another pre-record. Do we tend to
Mm.
lose our heads maybe sometimes a bit too easily? And that's definitely a good question. And it can be the case with a young team for sure, and you have to think about it. But we'll leave you there, everybody. Please smash that like button for us. Do get your comments in. What are your thoughts? Feel free to disagree with us. Feel free to grab a membership as well if you do want to support the channel in an extra way. A lot of good extra content, especially exclusive to all of the members. But we'll leave you there. Come on, you Spurs. In the Big Ange we trust. We're showing the trust in the Big Ange with this video, and we never stop. That's what we definitely showed last night as well. We never stop. Come on, you Spurs.